Why was everyone screaming except her? That's the question no one thought to ask. Not in those first terrible seconds when the cabin lights turned red and the world tilted sideways into nightmare. Not when 247 passengers dropped to the floor like puppets with severed strings. And certainly not when four armed men began moving through Atlantic Flight 847 with the practiced ease of wolves circling wounded prey. The screaming had started the moment Derek Stone's voice cut through the darkness. Everybody down. Get down now. Four words that transformed an overnight flight from Frankfurt to Washington, D.C. into something else entirely. Something primal and terrifying. Something that reminded 247 people that civilization is just a thin veneer painted over chaos, and that veneer can crack in the time it takes to pull a trigger. Derek Stone moved down the center aisle with his weapon raised, and there was something almost elegant about the way he carried himself. Tall, lean, with angular features that might have been handsome in another life, but his eyes told a different story. They were pale gray, empty, the kind of eyes that had watched people die and felt nothing afterward. Former CIA, 12 years of field work before he chose a different path. And now he walked through this metal tube suspended 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean like he owned every inch of it. Behind him came Mason Cole, all 240 pounds of former mercenary muscle, moving with the kind of casual violence that made people flinch before he even touched them. Blake Rivers had already secured the cockpit, his ceramic knife pressed against Captain Webb's throat. And Aiden Mills swept the economy section with jerky, unpredictable movements, the kind you see in young men running on adrenaline and ideology in equal measure. The crying started almost immediately. It always does. A child somewhere near row 30, an elderly woman praying in Spanish, her rosary beads clicking together like teeth chattering in winter, a businessman in a $3,000 suit whimpering into his hands, all that money suddenly meaningless. These were the sounds of 247 people confronting their mortality, the sounds of parents thinking about children they might never see again, of lovers remembering the last words they said, wondering if they would become last words forever, of travelers who had boarded this plane thinking about meetings and vacations and ordinary tomorrows that suddenly seemed like distant dreams. Derek's eyes swept through the cabin with practiced efficiency. Business class yielded exactly what he expected. Executives and government officials, all properly terrified, all pressed into their seats like they could somehow disappear into the leather. Economy class was chaos. Families and tourists and students all trembling, all convinced that this metal coffin hurtling through darkness would become their grave. And then his gaze reached the last row, seat 47F, and he stopped. There was a woman there. Small, maybe 5'4", 125 pounds at most. Dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in days. She wore an oversized gray hoodie, the kind you find in any college bookstore, and faded jeans with a hole in one knee. Her sneakers were kicked off somewhere on the floor. Her feet were bare, tucked beneath her. And she was asleep. Let that sink in for a moment. In the middle of 247 people screaming and crying and begging for their lives, this woman was sleeping. Not pretending, not frozen in fear, actually sleeping. Derek felt something twist in his chest, not quite a smile, something colder. Mason. The big man looked up from ransacking an overhead compartment. Derek nodded toward the back of the plane. That one. The sleeping beauty in 47F. Drag her out here. Let's show everyone what happens to people who don't pay attention. And Mason Cole grinned, revealing a chipped front tooth he'd earned in a bar fight in Johannesburg. He enjoyed this part. Always had. The terror in their eyes when they realized that the universe had selected them, specifically them, for punishment. He moved down the aisle with heavy steps. Passengers flinched away from him as he passed, pressing themselves deeper into their seats, silently thanking whatever god they prayed to that he wasn't coming for them. The woman didn't stir. Mason reached down and grabbed a fistful of her ponytail, yanking hard enough to pull her bodily from the seat into the aisle. She hit the floor without a sound. No scream, no gasp, no reflexive curse. Her eyes remained closed. The entire cabin held its breath, watching this small woman crumpled on the industrial carpet like a discarded doll. Mason frowned, clearly disappointed by the lack of reaction, and grabbed her arm to flip her onto her back. And here's where something interesting happened, something so brief that no one noticed. For less than a heartbeat, her body moved in a way that didn't quite match the ragdoll limpness she projected. Her shoulder tucked, her hip rotated. Her hands came up in a controlled motion that dispersed the impact across her forearms rather than her spine. Professional, trained, precise. Then she was trembling, her hands covering her face, her body curled into the fetal position of pure terror. No one noticed the momentary inconsistency. No one except a gray-haired man in business class seat 8A who lowered his book and watched with suddenly narrowed eyes. "Look at this," Derek called out, projecting his voice to reach every corner of the cabin. "This is what happens when someone doesn't take us seriously." Mason drew back his hand and slapped the woman hard across the face. The sound echoed through the silent aircraft like a gunshot. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. She still didn't open her eyes. Pathetic, Mason spat, the glob of saliva landing on her cheek. "Wake up, princess. Time to die." But in the next 45 minutes, these hijackers would understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had just awakened the wrong person. Because the woman curled on that floor, the one they were using as an example, the one they assumed was weak and helpless and utterly beneath their concern, was none of those things. Her name was Hazel Cooper. And 6 hours earlier, she had been sitting alone at an airport bar in Frankfurt, nursing a whiskey she had no intention of finishing. The bartender had asked if she was okay. Hazel had smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes, and said she was just tired. It wasn't a lie. She was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from 72 hours without sleep, 3 targets eliminated in Prague, 1 extraction gone wrong in Vienna, and another 8-hour flight before she could finally close her eyes in her own bed. The bartender had nodded sympathetically, seeing what she expected to see. A weary businesswoman, perhaps a student returning home after a semester abroad. She had no way of knowing that the small, exhausted-looking woman in front of her had killed 3 men in the past 3 days. Or that the way Hazel held her whiskey glass, her fingers positioned to leave room for rapid movement, was a habit drilled into her during years of training that most people couldn't imagine. When Hazel boarded the plane, she selected seat 47F specifically. Last row, window seat, back against the bulkhead, clear sight lines to both aisles, maximum distance from the cockpit, which meant maximum time to assess any threat before it reached her position. The seat beside the emergency exit over the wing had better tactical value in some scenarios, but she was too tired for scenarios tonight. She just wanted to sleep. The young man in 47E had tried to make conversation as she settled in. Noah Bennett, according to the MIT sweatshirt he wore, with an eager smile and the kind of innocent enthusiasm that made Hazel feel approximately 1,000 years old. "Long flight, huh? I'm Noah, heading home for winter break." "You?" "Work," Hazel had said, her voice flat, already reaching for the button to recline her seat. "Oh, cool. What do you do?" "Consulting." "What kind of consulting?" Hazel had turned to look at him then, and something in her eyes, some shadow that lived in the space between who she pretended to be and who she actually was, made Noah's smile falter. "The boring kind," she said. "If you'll excuse me." She put in earbuds, closed her eyes, and within minutes she was gone. Not the light dozing of a nervous traveler. Real sleep, deep sleep. The sleep of someone who had learned to grab rest wherever and whenever it presented itself, because tomorrow might not offer the luxury. And when the emergency lights flickered crimson and Derek Stone's voice shattered the darkness, Hazel's training kicked in before her conscious mind even registered the threat. Her eyes opened for a fraction of a second, long enough to assess. 4 hijackers, armed, professional movement, former military or intelligence, not amateurs. Her eyes closed again, and her body went limp, completely, utterly limp. Because Hazel Cooper had spent 12 years learning a fundamental truth that most people never understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. She felt Mason's hand in her hair, felt herself dragged from the seat, her body hitting the aisle floor with jarring force. She controlled the fall, distributed the impact, made it look accidental, made it look like she was nothing. No threat, no concern, just another terrified passenger. The slap across her face sent stars exploding behind her closed eyelids. The pain was sharp, immediate, real. She tasted blood. She felt saliva on her cheek, and she remained absolutely still. Because the moment she moved, the moment she showed them what she really was, people would die. The hijackers would panic, bullets would fly, and 247 passengers would pay the price for her pride. So she waited, listening, calculating, building a mental map of the cabin based on voices and footsteps and the subtle shifts in air pressure that told her where people were moving. Noah Bennett, the kid from MIT who had tried to make conversation, was crying now. She could hear him 3 feet away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She wondered if he was thinking about his family, if he regretted not saying something more meaningful the last time he saw them, if he was making the same silent bargains with God that terrified people always make. Please just let me live. I'll be better. I'll be kinder. I'll appreciate every moment, please. Hazel had made those bargains too, once upon a time, before she learned that the universe doesn't negotiate, before she understood that survival isn't about prayer, it's about preparation, patience, and the willingness to do what others won't. Derek Stone's voice cut through the cabin again. We're going to make this very simple. In approximately 15 minutes, we will reach our designated coordinates. At that point, unless our demands are met, we will execute one passenger every 5 minutes until compliance is achieved. Starting with Sleeping Beauty here. The cabin erupted into fresh screams, fresh prayers, fresh terror. Hazel felt the barrel of a gun press against her temple, cold metal, probably a Glock 19 based on the weight and the way Derek was holding it. She kept her breathing shallow, irregular, terrified. She kept her body limp. She kept every muscle relaxed except the ones deep in her core, the ones no one could see, the ones that were coiling like springs preparing. Because Hazel Cooper had been trained by the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division for 12 years. She had operated in 17 countries. She had survived situations that would have killed lesser operators 100 times over. And she had learned something that Derek Stone, with all his CIA training, had apparently forgotten. The most dangerous person in any room is the one you underestimate. Mason Cole kicked her in the ribs, not hard enough to break anything but hard enough to hurt, hard enough to reinforce his dominance, hard enough to show the other passengers what happened to people who didn't properly appreciate the gravity of their situation. Hazel's body jerked with the impact. She moaned. She let tears leak from beneath her closed eyelids. And inside, in the place where she kept her real self locked away from the world, she was counting. Counting footsteps. Counting weapons. Counting seconds until the moment arrived. Because the moment would arrive. It always did. And when it came, these 4 men would discover what it meant to wake a sleeping predator. What do you think was going through her mind in those 93 minutes of humiliation? That's what no one ever asks. They see the action afterward, the violence, the precision, the victory, but they don't think about the waiting, the endurance, the choice to be diminished so that others might live. Hazel Cooper lay on that floor for 93 minutes. She was slapped. She was spat on. She was kicked. She was dragged across the carpet like worthless cargo. Mason Cole used her as a footrest at one point, his boot pressing down on her back while he explained to the terrified passengers exactly what would happen if anyone tried to be a hero. And through it all, Hazel remained silent. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because she was waiting for the exact right moment. The moment when action would save the most lives. The moment when silence transformed into motion. That gray-haired man in seat 8A, the one who had noticed her controlled fall, was named Richard Webb, retired Marine colonel, 40 years of service. He had seen combat in 3 wars, and he recognized something in this woman's stillness, something professional, something dangerous. He caught her eye once for just a fraction of a second when Mason wasn't looking, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. Not fear, not defeat, calculation, pure, cold calculation. And he understood. She was waiting. She was choosing her moment. And when that moment came, God help anyone standing in her way. The 15 minutes Derek had mentioned stretched into 30, then 45. The demands hadn't been met. The government wasn't negotiating, and Derek Stone was getting impatient, which meant he was getting sloppy. He started packing, started turning his back to sections of the cabin, started paying more attention to the radio communication with his ground team than to the woman lying near his feet. Blake Rivers had left the cockpit door cracked open while he forced Captain Webb to maintain their holding pattern. Aiden Mills had gotten distracted by a young woman in row 23 who reminded him of someone, his weapon drifting down as he stared. And Mason Cole, confident in his dominance, had stopped watching Hazel entirely. That's when it happened, the moment, the shift, the tiny window of opportunity that Hazel had been waiting for. Derek turned his back to check the radio. Blake was focused on the cockpit. Aiden was distracted, and Mason was standing 3 feet away with his weapon pointed at a crying businessman, his attention completely elsewhere. Hazel's eyes opened. Really opened. For the first time since the hijacking began, she allowed herself to be fully present, fully aware, fully herself. And in that instant she became something else entirely. Not the frightened woman on the floor, not the sleeping passenger, not Hazel Cooper, independent consultant. She became the operative, the weapon, the thing she had spent 12 years training to be. Her body moved faster than thought, faster than reflex. One moment she was lying still, the next she was in motion, rising from the floor in a single fluid movement that covered the distance to Mason in less than a heartbeat. Her hand struck his weapon arm, redirecting the barrel away from the businessman. Her elbow drove into his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs. Her knee found his groin with precision that came from hundreds of hours of practice. And before Mason even understood what was happening, before his brain could process the transformation of victim into threat, Hazel had stripped the weapon from his hand and put 2 rounds center mass into his chest. The gunshots were deafening in the confined space. The cabin erupted into fresh chaos, but Hazel was already moving, already flowing toward the next target with the kind of grace that comes only from muscle memory so deep it bypasses conscious thought. Aiden Mills spun toward the sound, his weapon rising, his young face twisted in confusion and fear. He got off one wild shot that punched through the ceiling panels before Hazel put him down with 3 rounds. Clean, efficient, no hesitation. Blake Rivers emerged from the cockpit, his ceramic knife forgotten, reaching for his backup weapon. He was fast, professionally trained, but Hazel was faster. She put 2 rounds through the cockpit door that caught him in the throat and chest, and he went down in a spray of blood that painted the first-class cabin in shades of red. That left Derek Stone, the leader, the former CIA operative who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. He had his weapon up and pointed at Hazel before she could fully turn toward him. Their eyes met across the length of the cabin, and in that moment Derek understood. This wasn't some random passenger who got lucky. This was a professional, possibly his equal, possibly better. "Your move," he said, his voice steady despite the situation. Hazel didn't answer, didn't blink. Just stood there in her gray hoodie and bare feet, covered in other men's blood, holding a weapon with the casual competence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The standoff lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds where every passenger held their breath. 3 seconds where the universe balanced on a knife's edge between salvation and catastrophe. Then Derek made his mistake. He glanced toward the emergency exit row, just for an instant, just long enough to calculate an escape route. And that instant was all Hazel needed. She moved. Not away from danger, but directly into it, closing the distance between them with shocking speed. Derek fired twice, but Hazel was already somewhere else, already inside his guard, already redirecting his weapon hand toward the ceiling. Her palm strike broke his nose with a wet crack. Her knee shattered his wrist. The Glock clattered to the floor, and before Derek Stone could process the complete reversal of his situation, Hazel had him on his knees with his own weapon pressed against the base of his skull. The cabin was silent, absolutely, utterly silent. 247 people stared at the small woman in the gray hoodie who had just taken down 4 armed hijackers in less than 30 seconds. Noah Bennett, the kid from MIT, was the first to speak. "What the hell are you?" Hazel didn't look at him, kept her eyes and her weapon trained on Derek Stone. "Just tired," she said. The same words she had given the bartender in Frankfurt. The same mask. The same protective lie. Captain Webb's voice crackled over the intercom, shaky but determined. "This is your captain. The threat has been neutralized. We are returning to our original flight plan and will be landing in Washington, D.C. within the hour. Emergency services will be waiting." The cabin erupted, not in screams this time, in cheers, in crying, in the kind of explosive release that comes when people realize they're going to live after all. They're going to see their families. They're going to have those ordinary tomorrows they had almost lost. But Hazel didn't celebrate, didn't smile, just kept pressure on Derek Stone's neck while she secured his hands with plastic zip ties a flight attendant brought her. The gray-haired man from seat 8A approached slowly, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. "Colonel Richard Webb, USMC retired," he said quietly. "I recognize the training." Hazel glanced at him, said nothing. "Thank you," the colonel continued. "You saved a lot of lives today." Hazel looked at the bodies, at the blood, at the passengers who were staring at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Just doing my job," she said. The colonel smiled slightly. "That's one hell of a consulting gig." The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Hazel secured the scene, checked the cockpit, ensured no other threats remained. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, collecting weapons, checking zip ties, maintaining security while passengers whispered and pointed and tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. Noah Bennett couldn't stop staring at her. The woman who had been sleeping. The woman who had endured 93 minutes of abuse without fighting back. The woman who had then moved like violence given form. Eventually, he worked up the courage to approach her. "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" he asked. "Why did you let them hurt you like that?" Hazel looked at him, really looked at him, and for just a moment the mask slipped. He saw the exhaustion there, the weight, the cost of being what she was. "Because if I had moved too soon," she said quietly, "someone else might have gotten hurt. Someone like you." She walked away before he could respond, moving back to her position near Derek Stone, maintaining watch until the plane touched down at Washington Dulles with a fleet of emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. The FBI took Derek into custody. Paramedics checked the passengers. News crews captured footage of the survivors deplaning, many of them crying, all of them alive. And through it all, Hazel Cooper stood to the side, waiting. She knew what came next. She had been through it before. The debriefs, the questions, the paperwork, the inevitable complications of a CIA operative using lethal force on a civilian aircraft. A woman in a dark suit approached her. Mid-40s, steel-gray eyes, the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. "Deputy Director Sarah Chen," she said, extending a hand. "We need to talk." Hazel shook it. "I know." They walked together toward a black SUV parked away from the media circus. Chen didn't speak until they were inside with the doors closed and the privacy partition raised. "Your cover is completely blown," she said without preamble. "Every news outlet in the world is going to be running footage of you within the hour." Hazel nodded. She had expected this. "I'll need a new identity, new assignment." Chen was quiet for a moment. "There's another option." Hazel looked at her. "Go on." "What happened today," Chen said carefully, "has complicated certain ongoing operations. The fact that you were on that plane, that Derek Stone specifically targeted this flight, suggests someone knew you'd be there." Hazel felt ice form in her chest. "A leak." Chen nodded. "A mole. Inside the agency. Someone with access to operational movements and flight manifests. Someone who wanted you dead badly enough to orchestrate a hijacking to make it happen." The world tilted slightly. 12 years of service. 12 years of risking her life for her country, and someone inside her own organization had tried to kill her. Who? Chen shook her head. "We don't know, but we're going to find out, and we need you to help us do it." The SUV pulled away from the airport, heading toward Virginia, toward Langley, toward whatever came next. Hazel sat in silence, processing, calculating. Someone had betrayed her. Someone had sent 4 armed men onto a plane knowing she would be there, knowing they would try to kill her. And they had failed. Failed because she was better. Failed because she had the patience to wait. Failed because she understood something they didn't. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Until it's time to do everything. But there was something else gnawing at her. A question she hadn't allowed herself to ask during the crisis. Why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why risk an international incident? Why sacrifice 4 trained operatives just to eliminate one agency operator? She voiced the question aloud. Chen's expression darkened. That's what we need to figure out. But Hazel, whatever you're involved in, whatever you've stumbled onto, someone is willing to kill a plane full of innocent people to keep it buried. Which means it's big. Bigger than either of us can imagine. The Virginia countryside rolled past the tinted windows, trees and fields and the ordinary landscape of America, hiding secrets that most citizens would never know existed. Hazel closed her eyes, not sleeping this time, just thinking, remembering. 3 targets in Prague, 1 extraction in Vienna. What had connected them? What thread ran through her recent operations that would make someone this desperate? And then it hit her. All 3 targets in Prague had been linked to an old CIA operation from 20 years ago. The extraction in Vienna had been a former asset who claimed to have information about that same operation. Information about corruption, about betrayal, about something called Spectre. She opened her eyes. Chen was watching her. You remember something? Hazel nodded slowly. My last 4 assignments. They're all connected to an operation from 2005. Operation Mongoose. Chen went very still. Mongoose was shut down, completely buried. The files are so classified that even most of the 7th floor doesn't have access. Exactly, Hazel said. Which means someone doesn't want those files opened. Doesn't want questions asked. Doesn't want the truth about what really happened during Mongoose to come to light. The SUV turned off the main road, heading deeper into the Virginia wilderness. They weren't going to Langley, Hazel realized. They were going somewhere else, somewhere off the books. Chen must have seen the tension in her posture. Safe house, the deputy director explained. Until we figure out who we can trust, you're going dark, completely dark. No official debrief, no paper trail. As far as the world knows, you were a random passenger who happened to have combat training. We're giving you a cover story about being a former Marine, nothing more. And internally, Chen said quietly, you're dead, killed in the extraction that went wrong in Vienna. Your file has already been flagged as KIA. Only 3 people know you're alive. Me, Director Reeves, and you. The safe house was a cabin in the woods, isolated, secure. The kind of place you go when you need to disappear from the world for a while. Chen walked her inside, ensured the security systems were active, and then turned to face her. You have 48 hours to rest, she said. Then we start hunting. We find out who betrayed you. We find out what Mongoose was really about. And we tear down everyone involved. Hazel nodded. What about the passengers? What about the people on that flight who saw what I did? Their statements are being taken, but the official story is that a former Marine happened to be on board and acted heroically. No names. No photos that clearly show your face. We're burying this deep. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. Hazel, what you did today, what you endured on that floor, 93 minutes of humiliation to wait for the right moment. That's the mark of a true professional. Most operators would have moved sooner. Would have let ego override tactics. But you waited. And 247 people are alive because you had the discipline to be patient. Hazel didn't respond. What was there to say? That she had hated every second of it. That Mason Cole's boot pressing into her back had made her want to scream. That Derek Stone's weapon against her temple had required every ounce of her training to ignore. That she had endured it not because she was heroic, but because she understood math. 4 guns against 1. 247 potential casualties. The numbers were simple. The choice was simple. Even if the execution had been the hardest thing she had ever done. Chen left. The door locked behind her, and Hazel Cooper was alone in the silence of the safe house, surrounded by trees and shadows and questions that had no answers yet. She walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and stepped under the hot water, still fully clothed. Watched the blood wash away, not her blood. The blood of 4 men who had made the mistake of underestimating her. She felt nothing about their deaths. No guilt, no satisfaction, just the hollow numbness that comes from doing what needs to be done. Eventually she stripped off the ruined clothes, finished washing, and wrapped herself in a towel. Found clean clothes in the bedroom dresser. Government tissue. Anonymous. Everything she owned now fit in a backpack. Everything else had been in her apartment in D.C., an apartment she could never return to, a life she could never reclaim. She was a ghost now, officially dead, unofficially hunting the people who had tried to kill her. She lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about Noah Bennett, the kid from MIT with the eager smile. He had asked why she didn't stop them sooner, why she let them hurt her. And she had given him the truth, or at least part of it, because if she had moved too soon, someone else might have gotten hurt. But there was more to it than that. There was something her father had taught her years ago, back when she was training for the Marines, back before the CIA recruited her, back when she was just a girl trying to prove she could be as strong as any man. Sometimes, he had said, strength isn't about fighting back immediately. It's about knowing you could fight back and choosing not to. It's about having the power to destroy something and having the discipline to wait until destruction is actually necessary. Her father, Thomas Cooper, dead for 20 years now, killed in action during a classified operation that the agency had never fully explained. Hazel had been 8 years old when 2 officers in dress uniforms came to the door. 8 years old when her mother collapsed in the hallway. 8 years old when she learned that loving someone didn't protect them from bullets. She had joined the Marines at 18 to honor his memory, had excelled in every training program they threw at her, had been recruited by the CIA at 22 because someone recognized that she had the kind of mind that could calculate risk in real time, that could endure hardship without breaking, that could do the impossible when the impossible was required. And for 12 years, she had served without question, without doubt, believing she was making the world safer, believing she was protecting people like Noah Bennett and the elderly woman with the rosary and the child crying in row 30. But now she knew someone inside her own organization had tried to kill her, had been willing to sacrifice an entire plane full of innocent people just to bury whatever secrets Operation Mongoose contained. And that changed everything, changed the mission, changed the stakes, changed who she could trust and what she was fighting for. Her phone buzzed. A secure message from an unknown number. She opened it. A single line of text. Your father would be proud. Hazel stared at those words for a long time. Your father would be proud. Who had sent this, Chen? Reeves? Someone else? And how did they know about her father? How did they know that Thomas Cooper was the reason she did any of this? She wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers. But instead she set it down gently on the nightstand, turned off the light, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop. Kept replaying the hijacking. Kept analyzing every moment, every decision, every micro-expression on Derek Stone's face when he realized she wasn't what he thought she was. He had looked surprised, impressed even, like he respected her skill even as she was putting him down. Former CIA, 12 years of service, just like her. What had turned him? What had convinced him to betray everything he had sworn to protect? Money, ideology, something else. She needed answers, needed to understand the web she was caught in, needed to find the mole inside the agency before they tried to kill her again, because they would try again. People who orchestrated hijackings didn't give up after one failure. They adapted. They came at you from different angles. They kept coming until you were dead or they were. Hazel opened her eyes, stared at the darkness, made a decision. She wasn't going to wait 48 hours, wasn't going to rest, wasn't going to let fear or exhaustion or the weight of what she had endured slow her down. She was going to start hunting. Tonight. Now. She got out of bed, dressed in the dark, and moved to the cabin's secure computer terminal. Started pulling files on Operation Mongoose. Started tracing connections between her recent targets. Started building a map of everyone who had been involved in that operation 20 years ago and where they were now. Some were dead. Some were retired. Some were still active inside the agency, working in positions of power. And there, buried in the files, she found something. A name that kept appearing, a signature on transfer orders, a presence in the background of every major decision during Mongoose, someone who had risen through the ranks in the 20 years since, someone who now had access to everything, flight manifests, operational assignments, the power to coordinate a hijacking. The name made her blood run cold, because she knew this person, had worked with them, had trusted them. Deputy Director Sarah Chen. The woman who had picked her up from the airport, the woman who had driven her to this safe house, the woman who had told her she was going dark, that only 3 people knew she was alive. Hazel's mind raced. If Chen was the mole, then this whole situation was a setup. The safe house wasn't protection. It was a trap, a way to isolate her, to control the narrative, to finish what the hijacking had failed to accomplish. She moved to the window, looked out at the dark forest, saw nothing. But that didn't mean nothing was there. How long did she have? How long before Chen realized Hazel had figured it out? How long before the next team arrived to clean up the loose end? She grabbed her go bag, checked the weapon Chen had left for her, fully loaded. Either Chen was playing a deeper game than Hazel understood, or this was overconfidence. Either way, Hazel wasn't staying here to find out. She disabled the security system, slipped out through the back door, and disappeared into the Virginia woods. Behind her, the safe house sat empty and dark. Ahead of her, somewhere in the shadows, the truth was waiting. The truth about Mongoose, about Spectre, about what had really happened to her father 20 years ago, and about who in the CIA had decided that Hazel Cooper needed to die. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed that surviving the hijacking was her limit, that she had used up all her strength, all her skill, all her luck. They didn't understand that what happened on Flight 847 wasn't her fighting at full capacity. It was her fighting with one hand tied behind her back, fighting with 247 innocent lives to protect, fighting with rules of engagement that required precision and restraint. Now those rules didn't apply. Now she was alone in the dark with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Now she could be what she really was, not the sleeping passenger, not the terrified victim, not even the professional operative, something else. Something that her training had created but that circumstances had finally unleashed. A weapon with a mission, a daughter seeking answers, a warrior with nothing left to lose. The hunt was about to begin. And this time, Hazel Cooper wasn't going to wait for the right moment. She was going to create it. Where do you hide when the people hunting you have access to every database, every surveillance camera, every digital footprint you've ever left? That's the question Hazel asked herself as she moved through the Virginia woods, putting distance between herself and the safe house that had become a cage. She had maybe 6 hours before Chen realized she was gone. Maybe less if there were motion sensors she hadn't detected. Maybe more if Chen was still operating under the assumption that Hazel trusted her. Trust. What a strange concept that had become. For 12 years, Hazel had trusted the agency, had believed that despite its flaws, despite the moral ambiguities of intelligence work, the people she worked with were fundamentally committed to protecting American lives. That belief had died tonight. Died the moment she found Chen's name threaded through Operation Mongoose like a spider at the center of a web. The woods gave way to a service road. Hazel followed it east, staying in the tree line, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had spent years learning how to be invisible. Her mind was working through scenarios, calculating probabilities, building contingency plans within contingency plans. If Chen was the mole, who else was compromised? Director Reeves, other deputies. How deep did this go? And what was Spectre? The name had appeared in the Vienna extraction file, mentioned by the asset she had been sent to retrieve. The asset who had been killed before Hazel could get him out. The asset who had claimed to have proof that Operation Mongoose wasn't what everyone thought it was, that it had been a cover for something else, something darker. She needed allies, needed people she could trust who existed outside the agency's reach. The problem was that after 12 years of deep cover work, after maintaining false identities and burning bridges with anyone who might remember her real name, Hazel Cooper didn't have many friends. She had contacts, assets, professional relationships, but friends, people who would risk everything to help her. That list was very short. It started and ended with one name: Marcus Kane. Former Delta Force operator turned private security contractor. They had worked together in Syria 5 years ago, had saved each other's lives more than once, had shared a bottle of very bad whiskey in a safe house in Damascus, and made promises about watching each other's backs if things ever went sideways. Things had definitely gone sideways. The question was whether Marcus would remember those promises, whether he would believe her story, whether he could help her without getting caught in the blast radius of whatever Spectre was. Hazel reached the main road and started walking. She needed transportation, needed to get to D.C., needed to find Marcus and hope he hadn't sold his soul to the same people who were hunting her. A truck approached from behind, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Hazel made a decision, stepped out onto the shoulder, raised her hand. The truck slowed, pulled over. An older man with a gray beard and kind eyes looked down at her through the passenger window. "You okay, miss? Car break down?" Hazel manufactured a smile, practiced, harmless, something like that. "Any chance you're heading toward D.C.? The man hesitated. She could see him calculating. Young woman alone on a dark road, could be genuine, could be trouble. "Get in," he said finally. "Name's Walter. I'm hauling supplies to a restaurant in Alexandria." Hazel climbed into the cab, grateful, cautious. "I'm Hazel, thanks for stopping. Most people wouldn't have." Walter put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. "Yeah, well, my daughter's about your age. I'd hope someone would stop for her if she needed help." They drove in silence for a while. Hazel watched the darkness outside, alert for pursuit, for anything that suggested Chen had figured out she was gone. But the road stayed empty, just the truck and the night and the steady rhythm of the engine. Walter glanced at her a few times, clearly curious but too polite to pry. Finally he spoke. "You in some kind of trouble?" Hazel considered lying, considered spinning some story about a boyfriend and a bad breakup. But Walter had kind eyes and he had stopped when he didn't have to. He deserved something closer to the truth, even if she couldn't give him all of it. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm in trouble. The kind where the people chasing me have a lot of resources and I don't have many places to hide." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across and opened the glove compartment. Inside was a burner phone still in its package. "Take it. My wife makes me keep a spare in case of emergencies. Sounds like you're having one." Hazel stared at the phone. This man, this stranger, offering help without asking for anything in return. It was the kind of fundamental decency that she had spent 12 years fighting to protect. The kind of goodness that made all the darkness worthwhile. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. Walter nodded. "We all need help sometimes. No shame in that." They reached the outskirts of Alexandria as the sun was beginning to rise. Walter pulled into a truck stop, idled the engine. "This is as far as I go. You gonna be okay from here?" Hazel opened the door, then paused. "Walter, what you did tonight, stopping for me, giving me the phone, you probably saved my life." Walter's weathered face creased into a smile. "Then I guess we both did something worthwhile today." She watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the early morning traffic. Then she activated the burner phone and dialed a number she had memorized years ago. Prayed it was still active. Prayed Marcus was still someone she could trust. The phone rang 3 times. Then a voice, low, cautious, prepared for trouble. "Yeah, it's Ghost," Hazel said, using the call sign Marcus had given her in Syria. "I need extraction." Silence on the other end. Then, "Ghost is dead, died in Vienna 3 days ago. Official agency notification. Marcus, it's me, I'm alive, and I need your help." Another pause, longer this time. Then an address in Northeast D.C. 1 hour, come alone. If this is a setup, you won't leave that address alive. It's not a setup. It's a girl trying to stay alive long enough to find out why her own people tried to kill her. The line went dead. Hazel looked at the burner phone. 1 hour. 1 chance. She started walking, moving through the awakening city with the kind of purposeful anonymity that made people's eyes slide past her. Just another commuter. Just another face in the crowd. Just another person trying to get somewhere in the early morning rush. The address Marcus had given her was a storage facility in a rundown section of Northeast. Industrial, isolated, the kind of place where you could have a conversation without worrying about witnesses. Hazel approached carefully, checking sight lines, looking for ambush points. But the lot was empty except for a single black Ford F-150 parked near Unit 47. The driver's door opened and Marcus Kane stepped out. He looked the same as she remembered. Tall, solid, with the kind of watchful intensity that came from too many years in combat zones. His right hand rested casually on his hip, near where his weapon would be. His eyes swept over her, taking in the government-issue clothes, the exhaustion, the barely controlled tension. "You look like hell, Ghost. You should see the other guys." Marcus's expression didn't change. "The news said a hijacking was stopped on Atlantic Flight 847. Said a random former Marine took down 4 tangos." "That was you." Hazel nodded. "That was me. And about 6 hours after I landed, I realized my own deputy director is probably the one who orchestrated the hijacking to kill me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the storage unit. "Inside, we need to talk somewhere less exposed." The unit was climate-controlled, filled with unmarked crates and equipment cases. Marcus closed the door behind them, locked it, and turned to face her. "Talk. I need to know everything before I decide whether I'm helping you or handing you over to your own people." Hazel took a deep breath, started from the beginning. Prague, Vienna, Operation Mongoose, Spectre. Chen's name in the files. The safe house that felt like a trap, all of it, every detail, every suspicion, every conclusion she had drawn. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he walked to one of the equipment cases, opened it, and pulled out a laptop, started typing. "What are you doing? Checking something? If what you're saying is true, there should be." He stopped, stared at the screen. "What? Your file, it's been updated. You're officially KIA as of 400 this morning. Killed in action during a black operation that went wrong. No body recovered, full operational burial." Marcus turned the laptop so she could see. There it was, her service record, her photograph, and stamped across it in red letters, "Deceased." Hazel felt something twist in her chest. They had erased her, made her a ghost in more than just call sign. She was officially dead, which meant no one would be looking for her. No one would question her absence. And no one would investigate if her body turned up somewhere with a bullet in the back of the head. Marcus closed the laptop. "Okay, I believe you. So what's the play?" "We find out what Operation Mongoose really was. We find out who Spectre is. And we burn down everyone involved." Marcus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression, just like Syria, except this time the enemy is our own people. "This time," Hazel said, her voice cold, "the enemy is people who think they can betray everything we stand for and get away with it." Marcus moved to another equipment case, started pulling out gear, weapons, ammunition, electronic surveillance equipment. "Then we're going to need supplies, and we're going to need to be smarter than we've ever been. Because if Chen is involved, she has access to every resource the agency has. Facial recognition, financial tracking, communication intercepts. We move wrong once and we're done." Hazel watched him work. Grateful, relieved, terrified. "You didn't have to help me, could have walked away. Could have decided this wasn't your fight." Marcus looked at her. "You remember Damascus, when we were pinned down in that apartment building and you went back for Jenkins even though he was already dead?" "I remember. You went back because he was one of ours, because you don't leave people behind even when it's the smart play." He handed her a Glock and 3 magazines. "You're one of mine, Ghost. Which means I don't walk away. Simple as that." They spent the next hour planning, building an operational framework, identifying resources they could access without triggering agency alerts. Marcus had contacts in the private sector, people who owed him favors, people who could provide intelligence without asking too many questions. And Hazel had her training, her knowledge of how the agency operated, her understanding of the blind spots in their surveillance systems. The plan was simple in concept, brutally difficult in execution. They would start with Operation Mongoose, pull every file they could access without leaving digital footprints, identify everyone who had been involved, find the ones who were still alive and willing to talk, follow the thread until it led them to Spectre, and when they found Spectre they would expose them, publicly, loudly, in a way that couldn't be buried or denied. But first they needed to disappear, really disappear. Not just from the agency, but from every database, every camera, every digital tracking system. They needed to become ghosts in fact as well as name. Marcus had a safe house in Baltimore, off the books, owned through shell companies that couldn't be traced back to him. They would start there, regroup, build their intelligence picture, and then they would start hunting. The sun was fully up when they left the storage facility. Marcus drove. Hazel sat in the passenger seat, watching the city pass by, thinking about the passengers on Flight 847, thinking about Noah Bennett and his eager smile, thinking about the elderly woman with her rosary, thinking about all the people who had gone home to their families because she had endured 93 minutes of humiliation. Marcus glanced at her. You okay? Define okay. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, what you did on that plane, waiting as long as you did, that takes a different kind of courage than fighting. I don't feel very courageous. You feel like someone who just found out her whole world was a lie. That's accurate. The traffic thickened as they approached Baltimore. Marcus navigated through it with practiced ease. The safe house was in Fells Point, tucked between a used bookstore and a Vietnamese restaurant. 3 stories, brick facade, completely unremarkable, perfect. Inside was equally unassuming, functional furniture, basic kitchen, computers and communication equipment hidden behind false panels. Marcus had clearly been preparing for the possibility that his past might catch up with him someday. Smart, professional. Hazel felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. For the first time since she had fled the Virginia cabin, she could breathe. Marcus made coffee. Real coffee, not the instant garbage they lived on during deployments. They sat at the kitchen table and pulled up files on a secure laptop, beginning the painstaking work of reconstructing Operation Mongoose. It had been a counterproliferation operation officially, 20 years ago, designed to interdict weapons shipments from Eastern Europe to militant groups in the Middle East. Successful, according to the after-action reports. Several key targets eliminated. Multiple shipments intercepted. The operation had been shut down when the primary objective was achieved. Clean, simple, closed. But Hazel knew better now. Knew that the official story was always just a story. The truth was buried deeper, in the gap between what was reported and what actually happened. In the names that appeared in supporting documents but not in the primary files. In the money that moved in ways that didn't quite make sense. She pulled up the personnel roster for Mongoose, 23 operators, 11 support staff, 3 analysts. Of those 37 people, 12 were dead. Natural causes mostly, a few accidents, 1 suicide, but the timing was interesting. 7 of those deaths had occurred within 3 years of the operation ending, statistically unlikely, not impossible but suspicious. What are you thinking? Marcus asked. I'm thinking someone cleaned house, got rid of everyone who might have known too much. But they couldn't kill everyone, too obvious. So they picked the ones who might talk, the ones who had consciences. Marcus leaned back in his chair, which means the ones who are still alive are either completely in the dark or completely complicit. Exactly. So we find the ones in the dark and make them talk. And we find the ones who are complicit and make them wish they had talked. They worked through the list, cross-referencing current locations, current positions, current vulnerabilities. And there, near the bottom of the roster, a name jumped out. James Mitchell, operations officer during Mongoose, currently retired, living in Annapolis. According to social media, he spent most of his time sailing and posting about his grandchildren. Hazel pulled up his service record, decorated officer, 28 years with the agency. No disciplinary actions, no flags, nothing that suggested he was anything other than a dedicated public servant who had earned his retirement. Which could be true or could be a very good cover. We start with him, she said. Why him? Because according to these files, he was Thomas Cooper's partner during Mongoose. He was my father's partner. Marcus looked at her. You didn't know? I was 8 when my father died. The agency told my mother it was a training accident, classified details. We got a folded flag and a letter thanking us for his service. Marcus was quiet. Then, I'm sorry, Hazel shook her head, don't be, just help me find out what really happened. They spent the rest of the day preparing, building a cover story, creating fake credentials, planning how to approach Mitchell without spooking him. If he was innocent, they needed his cooperation. If he was complicit, they needed him to think he was safe until they could extract what he knew. The approach would be simple. Hazel would pose as a researcher working on a classified history project, gathering oral histories from retired officers about successful operations. Mitchell's work on Mongoose made him a perfect subject. Flattery, nostalgia, the chance to talk about the old days with someone who seemed genuinely interested. People loved telling their stories, loved being remembered as heroes, and if Mitchell was hiding something, the conversation would give him a chance to reveal it. They drove to Annapolis the next morning. Marcus stayed in the car while Hazel approached the modest house on a tree-lined street. She rang the doorbell, waited, heard footsteps inside. The door opened and James Mitchell stood there. 70 years old, gray hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather, probably was someone's grandfather. Definitely not someone who looked like they had dark secrets. "Can I help you?" Hazel smiled, professional, harmless. "Mr. Mitchell. My name is Dr. Sarah Warren. I'm with the agency's Historical Projects Division. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk about your work on Operation Mongoose." Mitchell's expression changed. Just for an instant, a flicker of something, wariness, fear. It passed so quickly Hazel almost missed it. "Mongoose," he said slowly. "That was a long time ago, I understand, but we're working on a comprehensive history of counterproliferation operations and Mongoose was a significant success. Your insights would be invaluable." He studied her face, looking for something, trying to decide if this was legitimate or something else. Finally, he stepped back. "Come in." "But I can only spare about 20 minutes. I have a sailing lesson at 11, of course. I appreciate any time you can give." The house was comfortable, well lived in. Family photos on the walls, a comfortable couch, a bookshelf filled with sailing manuals and Tom Clancy novels. Mitchell gestured to a chair and sat across from her. "So, what do you want to know about Mongoose?" Hazel pulled out a notebook, played the part. "I've read the official after-action reports, but I'm interested in the operational realities. The decisions made in real time. The challenges that don't make it into the documentation." Mitchell nodded. That was good operational security, actually. A lot of what happened during Mongoose was improvised. We had intelligence suggesting weapons shipments were moving through a network of contacts in Prague and Vienna. Our job was to interdict those shipments and eliminate the key players. You succeeded. Mitchell's smile didn't reach his eyes. We achieved our primary objectives, yes. He was being careful, choosing his words with precision. Hazel pressed gently. "I noticed you worked closely with Thomas Cooper during the operation. He was your partner, correct?" Mitchell went very still. "Yes, Tom was my partner. He was a good man, a good officer." The past tense wasn't lost on Hazel. She kept her voice neutral. "I understand he died shortly after Mongoose concluded. Do you mind if I ask what happened? The official reports are somewhat sparse." Mitchell stood abruptly. "I think this interview is over. Excuse me. You're not from the Historical Projects Division. There is no Historical Projects Division. And you're asking questions that someone doing legitimate research wouldn't ask." Hazel remained seated, calm. "Who do you think I am?" Mitchell moved to a drawer, pulled out a weapon, pointed it at her with steady hands. "I think you're someone testing how much I remember, someone checking if I'm still reliable, someone sent by the people who have been watching me for 20 years. Hazel raised her hand slowly. "I'm not who you think I am, no." "Then who are you?" "My name is Hazel Cooper. I'm Thomas Cooper's daughter, and I'm trying to find out why someone tried to kill me 3 days ago on a hijacked plane." Mitchell's weapon wavered. "Cooper. Tom's daughter, you're supposed to be dead." "I am dead, officially, KIA as of yesterday morning. Which gives me a limited window to find out what Operation Mongoose really was and why people connected to it keep dying." Mitchell lowered the weapon slowly, sat down hard in his chair. "You look like him, around the eyes. Same expression when you're calculating whether to trust someone." "She is alive, my father." Mitchell looked at her. There was pain in his eyes, old pain, carefully buried. "Your father died because he found out the truth about Mongoose, found out what we were really doing, and he couldn't live with it." The words hit Hazel like a physical blow. "What do you mean? What were you really doing?" Mitchell was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, tired. We thought we were running a counterproliferation operation. Thought we were the good guys stopping weapons from reaching terrorists. But about halfway through, Tom started noticing inconsistencies. Money that didn't track. Shipments that didn't match the intelligence. Targets who seemed surprised when we eliminated them like they hadn't known they were targets at all. He started asking questions, started digging. And what did he find? That mongoose wasn't about stopping weapons shipments. It was about creating them. We were facilitating the exact thing we thought we were preventing, making sure weapons reached certain groups so that conflicts would continue, so that instability would persist, because instability was profitable for someone. Mitchell's hands were shaking now. For who? Hazel demanded. Who was profiting? Mitchell looked at her. That's where it gets complicated, because the answer is everyone. Defense contractors, oil companies, private military firms, intelligence agencies who needed to justify their budgets. It was a web, a system, and at the center of it was someone code-named Spectre. Hazel felt the pieces clicking into place, and my father discovered this. Yes, he discovered it, and he confronted the operation lead, demanded that we shut down Mongoose and report what was really happening. What happened? The operation lead told him it went higher than he thought, that exposing Mongoose would destabilize relationships across 3 continents, that sometimes the greater good required accepting smaller evils. And your father, Hazel's voice was barely above a whisper. Your father said that wasn't good enough. Said he didn't join the CIA to facilitate arms trafficking. Said he would go public if necessary. Mitchell stood, walked to the window, looked out at the quiet street. 2 days later, he was dead, killed during what was officially reported as a training accident. But it wasn't an accident, it was murder. And everyone who knew the truth was given a choice. Stay silent and live. Talk and die. Hazel felt tears burning behind her eyes. Refused to let them fall. You chose silence. Mitchell turned to face her. His expression was anguished. I had a family, a wife, 3 children. They made it very clear what would happen if I talked. So yes, I chose silence. I chose to be a coward. I've lived with that choice every day for 20 years. She wanted to hate him, wanted to scream at him for betraying her father. But looking at this broken old man, she understood. The system had been designed to make cowards of good people, to make survival contingent on complicity. Who was the operation lead? Who gave the order to kill my father? Mitchell shook his head. I don't know. Mongoose had a compartmentalized structure. I reported to Tom. Tom reported to someone else. I never knew who. But whoever it was, they had enough power to make a murder look like an accident and enough reach to keep everyone silent for 2 decades. Hazel stood. Thank you for telling me. Mitchell looked surprised. That's it. You're not going to threaten me, not going to force me to testify. I'm not going to put you and your family at risk, Hazel said. You've lived with this long enough, but I need names. Anyone from Mongoose who might still have information. Anyone who might be willing to talk. Mitchell walked to his bookshelf, pulled down a volume that turned out to be hollow inside, retrieved a USB drive. I've kept this for 20 years. I told myself it was insurance in case they came for me. But really, I think I kept it because some part of me hoped that someday someone would come asking the right questions. He placed it in her hand. This has everything I remember. Names, dates, operational details, financial transfers. It's not complete, but it's a start. Hazel closed her fingers around the drive. One more question. Who else from Mongoose is still alive and might talk? Mitchell's expression darkened. Most of the people who knew what Tom knew are dead. But there's one. Richard Webb. He was logistics during the operation. Retired now. Lives in Montana. Last I heard, he was off-grid, paranoid. But if anyone has more pieces of this puzzle, it's him. Hazel felt something click. Richard Webb. The gray-haired man from Seat 8A, the one who had recognized her training. The one who had thanked her for saving the plane. That couldn't be coincidence. He was on the plane. Mitchell went pale. Webb was on your flight, the one that was hijacked. Hazel nodded, and he recognized me. Knew I was trained. He was testing you. Mitchell's voice was hollow, seeing if you were real, if you could survive. Why? What did I prove by surviving a hijacking? That you're your father's daughter, that you have the skill and the will to see this through. Mitchell moved to the door, opened it. You need to go. If Webb was on that plane, it means things are moving faster than I thought. Means Spectre is making plays. You need to find Webb before they do. Hazel stepped onto the porch, turned back. Mitchell, for what it's worth, I understand why you stayed silent. I don't blame you. Mitchell's eyes were wet. Your father would have. He walked her to the car where Marcus was waiting. Marcus took one look at her expression and started the engine. We good. We have a lead. Montana. A man named Richard Webb. Marcus pulled away from the curb. And Mitchell, he's a coward who's been living with his choice for 20 years, but he gave me everything he has. She plugged the USB drive into the laptop. Files started populating the screen. Operational reports, financial transfers, names, so many names. Marcus glanced at the screen as he drove. That's a lot of people to investigate. We don't need to investigate all of them. We need to find the ones who are still alive and willing to talk. We need to build a case so airtight that when we expose Spectre, there's no way to bury it again. And how do we do that? We find Richard Webb, we find out what he knows, and we connect the dots between Mongoose and the present day. Between a 20-year-old conspiracy and an attempted hijacking 3 days ago. Because someone in the current CIA leadership is still protecting Spectre, still covering up the truth, still willing to kill to keep secrets buried. Marcus navigated onto the highway, headed north. Montana is a long drive. We could fly, too risky. The moment we book a flight, it triggers alerts. Chen will know we're moving, so we drive, stay off the grid, take our time. They drove through the day and into the night, taking turns behind the wheel, eating gas station food, staying on back roads when possible. Hazel used the time to go through Mitchell's files, building a timeline, connecting people and events. The picture that emerged was damning. Operation Mongoose had been a shell, a legitimate counterproliferation operation used as cover for what amounted to state-sponsored arms trafficking. Weapons had been moved into conflict zones under the guise of interdiction. Profits had been funneled through a network of shell companies, and when anyone got too close to the truth, they disappeared. Her father had been the first, but not the last. 7 other operators had died in the 3 years following Mongoose's official conclusion, all in ways that could be explained as natural or accidental, but the statistical clustering was impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all was Spectre, a code name, a shadow. Someone with enough power to orchestrate murders across multiple continents, someone still active, still dangerous, still willing to kill to protect their secrets. By the time they reached Montana, Hazel had a working theory. Spectre wasn't one person. It was a position, a role passed down through the years. Whoever held it had access to agency resources and enough autonomy to run operations outside official oversight. They would need high-level clearance, need connections throughout the intelligence community, need the kind of authority that made people afraid to ask questions. Someone like Deputy Director Sarah Chen, or someone she reported to. Or someone who had the leverage to make her compliant. The mountains of Montana rose around them, beautiful, isolated, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Marcus pulled into a small town called Whitefish, population barely 1,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out. We need to be careful, Hazel said. If Webb is as paranoid as Mitchell suggested, showing up asking questions might spook him. So what's the play? We don't ask questions. We wait for him to come to us. How? Hazel thought about it. Mitchell said Webb recognized her training on the plane, had tested her. That meant he was watching, waiting to see if she would survive, waiting to see if she was worthy of the truth her father had died protecting. We make ourselves visible, she said. We stay in town, we wait, and we let him decide when to make contact. It took 2 days, 2 days of staying in a cheap motel, 2 days of eating at the local diner. 2 days of being seen but not saying much. And on the evening of the 2nd day, Hazel was sitting alone at the diner counter when a man slid onto the stool next to her. Richard Webb, the gray-haired man from Flight 847. He didn't look at her. Just ordered coffee and sat in silence. After a moment, he spoke quietly. You survived the hijacking, you found Mitchell, and now you're here. Hazel kept her eyes forward, matched his posture, his casual lack of eye contact. I'm here because my father died 20 years ago and I want to know why. Webb sipped his coffee. Your father died because he chose truth over survival. That's not an answer. Webb finally turned to look at her. Yes, it is. It's the only answer that matters. In this world, in the shadows where we operate, truth is the most dangerous weapon there is. Your father wielded that weapon, and it killed him. Hazel met his eyes. Then help me wield it properly. Help me finish what he started. Webb was silent for a long time. Then he pulled a key from his pocket, placed it on the counter between them. There's a cabin 15 miles north of here. GPS coordinates are on the keychain. Go there tomorrow at dawn. Come alone. If you bring anyone else, you won't find anything except an empty building. He stood, walked out of the diner without looking back. Marcus appeared a moment later, sliding into the stool Webb had vacated. I was watching from the car. Who was that? Richard Webb. He wants me to meet him at a cabin, alone. No, Marcus said immediately. That could be a trap. Hazel picked up the key. It could be, but it's the only lead we have. So tomorrow morning I'm going to that cabin, and you're going to stay here and wait. If I'm not back by noon, you extract. Get everything we've learned to someone who can use it. Make sure my father's story gets told. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. Understood that some things you had to do alone. Just be careful, he said. I'm always careful. You're always reckless. There's a difference. She smiled. It was tired but genuine. Since when? Dawn came cold and clear. Hazel drove the rental car north, following the GPS coordinates. The road deteriorated into a dirt track, then into barely more than a path. Finally, she reached a clearing with a small cabin, isolated. No neighbors for miles, no cell service, perfect for a conversation that couldn't be overheard. She approached the cabin carefully, weapon drawn, ready for anything. But when she opened the door, she found Webb sitting at a table with 2 cups of coffee and a corkboard covered in photographs and documents. He gestured to the empty chair. Sit. We have a lot to discuss and not much time. Hazel sat, looked at the corkboard. It was a conspiracy theorist's dream, or nightmare. Photos connected by red string, documents with sections highlighted, names and dates and locations spanning 2 decades. This, Webb said, is everything I've gathered about Spectre and Operation Mongoose. It's incomplete, it's fragmentary, but it's enough to understand what your father discovered, and why he had to die. He stood, walked to the board, pointed to a photo of a man in his 50s. This is Senator Richard Hartwell, died of a heart attack 6 years ago. Before he was a senator, he was CIA Deputy Director of Operations. And during Operation Mongoose, he was the man your father reported to. Hazel leaned forward. So Hartwell ordered my father's death. Webb shook his head. Hartwell was Spectre, or one of them. Like I said, Spectre isn't a person, it's a position. A role that gets passed down when the current holder dies or retires. Hartwell held it during Mongoose. When he died, someone else took it over. Who? Webb pointed to another photo. This woman, do you recognize her? Hazel felt her blood run cold. It was Sarah Chen, 20 years younger, different hairstyle, but unmistakably the same person. Chen was Hartwell's protege, his chosen successor. She knew everything about Mongoose, everything about what it really was. And when Hartwell died, she inherited the operation, inherited Spectre, has been running it for the past 6 years. Hazel stood, started packing. So Chen orchestrated the hijacking, tried to kill me because I was getting close to the truth. But how did she know? How did she know I was investigating Mongoose? Webb's expression was grim because someone told her, someone you trusted. Mitchell. Hazel's voice was sharp. No. Mitchell kept his silence for 20 years. He wouldn't break it now. Then who? Webb pulled another photo from the board. This one was recent. High resolution, taken with a telephoto lens. It showed a man in his 40s, handsome, well-dressed, entering a building in downtown Washington. Hazel recognized the building. CIA headquarters. She recognized the man too. Marcus Kane. Her blood went cold. No, not possible. Marcus has been helping me. Webb's voice was gentle. Has he been tracking you, feeding your location to Chen, making sure you stay exactly where they want you? Think about it. How did the hijacking target your specific flight? How did Chen know to pick you up from the airport? How did she know you would run? Hazel felt the world tilting, tried to find solid ground. Marcus saved me in Syria. We've worked together for years. Webb nodded, yes. And during those years, how often did operations you worked on together end with convenient intelligence failures? How often did assets disappear just before you could extract them? How often did you almost die? She wanted to argue, wanted to defend Marcus, but memories were surfacing. Syria, the safe house that had been compromised before they even arrived. Afghanistan, the source who had been killed the night before their meeting. Vienna, the extraction that had gone wrong in ways that didn't make sense. "Oh God," she whispered, "Marcus works for Spectre. Has since before you met him. His job was to get close to you, to monitor you, to make sure you didn't discover what your father had discovered." Webb moved to stand beside her. "And when you survived the hijacking, when you started asking the right questions, Marcus made sure you stayed within arm's reach. Made sure you thought you were hunting Spectre, while actually being led exactly where they wanted you to go." "Which is here," Hazel said, realization dawning. "This cabin, this conversation, it's a trap." Webb smiled. It was cold, sad. "Yes, it's a trap, but not the one you think." He walked to the window, looked out at the woods. "Marcus Kane is probably setting up a perimeter right now, probably calling in a cleanup crew to eliminate both of us and bury the truth forever. But he made one critical mistake." "What?" "He underestimated you, just like the hijackers did. He thought you would trust him completely, thought you wouldn't question his help, thought you would walk into this cabin and let yourself be eliminated without a fight." Webb turned back to face her. "But I don't think you're going to do that, because you're your father's daughter, and your father never gave up, never stopped fighting for the truth, even when it cost him everything." Hazel's mind was racing, calculating, planning. If Marcus was outside, if a cleanup crew was coming, if this cabin was about to become a kill box, then she needed to move, needed to act, needed to do what she did best: wait for exactly the right moment, then strike with overwhelming force. She looked at Webb. "Why are you telling me this? Why warn me?" Webb's expression softened. "Because your father was my friend, because he died for the truth and I've spent 20 years being a coward. Because maybe, just maybe, his daughter can finish what he started." He reached into his jacket. Hazel's weapon came up automatically, but Webb just smiled. Pulled out a USB drive identical to the one Mitchell had given her. "This has everything: names, accounts, operations, 20 years of evidence that Spectre exists, that Mongoose was just the beginning, that the corruption goes deeper than you can imagine." He placed it on the table between them. "Take it. Run. Survive. And when you're ready, burn them all down." Outside, the sound of vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, professional, coordinated. Webb looked out the window again. "They're here. You have maybe 2 minutes before they establish a perimeter. The cabin has a back exit through the basement. Leads to a tunnel that comes out about a quarter-mile from here. Take it. I'll buy you time. You'll die." Webb's smile turned peaceful. "I've been dead for 20 years. This is just making it official." Hazel grabbed the USB drive. Looked at this man who had flown across an ocean to sit in seat 8A on her flight, who had recognized her, tested her, led her here, gave her the truth her father had died protecting. "Thank you." Webb pulled a weapon from his desk drawer. "Tell the world what happened. Tell them about Mongoose, about Spectre, about all of us who chose silence over justice. Make sure we're remembered not as heroes but as cautionary tales." She wanted to say more, wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But the engines were closer now. Time was running out. She moved to the basement door, looked back one final time. "Your father would be proud of you," Webb said. The words hit her harder than any bullet could have. Then she was moving, down the stairs, through the darkness, into the tunnel that smelled of earth and secrets. Behind her she heard gunfire, heard Webb's weapon answering, heard shouts and the professional coordination of people who killed for a living. Heard it all fade as she ran through the tunnel, emerged into the woods, kept running, put distance between herself and the cabin, between herself and Webb's last stand, between herself and everything Marcus had pretended to be. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like they would collapse, until the sound of gunfire faded completely. Then she stopped, pulled out the burner phone Walter had given her, dialed a number she had found in Mitchell's files, a journalist, someone who had spent years investigating intelligence community corruption, someone who might actually publish what she was about to give them. The phone rang. A woman answered. "This is Reese." "I have a story for you," Hazel said. "A story about corruption in the CIA, about an operation called Mongoose, about murders and betrayal and secrets that go back 20 years. There was a pause. Who is this? My name is Hazel Cooper. I'm the daughter of Thomas Cooper, and I have everything you need to expose it all. She sent the files, both USB drives, everything Mitchell had given her, everything Webb had died to provide, sent them to Reese with instructions to publish immediately, to send copies to every news outlet that would listen, to make sure the truth couldn't be buried again. Then she destroyed the phone, scattered the pieces, started walking. She knew what came next, knew that publishing the truth wouldn't keep her safe, might actually make her more of a target, but Webb had been right. Her father had chosen truth over survival, had believed that some things were worth dying for, and she was her father's daughter, so she would run, would hide, would use every skill she had learned in 12 years of service to stay ahead of the people hunting her, would survive long enough to see Spectre exposed, to see her father's name cleared, to see justice done even if it came too late. The mountain stretched out before her, beautiful and indifferent. She thought about her father, about the choice he had made 20 years ago, about standing up for what was right even when it cost everything, about the kind of courage it took to say no when everyone else was choosing silence. She thought about the passengers on Flight 847, about Noah Bennett with his eager smile, about the elderly woman with her rosary, about 247 people who were alive because she had chosen patience over pride, endurance over ego. She thought about Webb, about Mitchell, about all the people who had lived with their choices for 20 years, who had carried the weight of their silence like stones in their pockets, who had finally, in their own ways, chosen to speak. And she thought about Marcus, about the betrayal, about how he had played his role perfectly, had been her friend, her ally, her trusted partner, all while working to ensure she never learned the truth. She should hate him, should want revenge, but mostly she just felt tired, tired of the lies, tired of the shadows, tired of a world where good people had to die for telling the truth. Her phone buzzed. The burner was destroyed, but she had kept her regular phone powered off. She turned it on now. A message waited, unknown number, 5 words, the story is published. Run. Hazel smiled. It was cold, hard, victorious. Spectre would be coming for her now, with everything they had, but the truth was out there, being read by millions, being investigated by journalists who wouldn't stop until every thread was pulled, being used by prosecutors who would bring charges, being weaponized by politicians who would demand accountability. Her father's death wouldn't be meaningless. Webb's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Mitchell's 20 years of silence would finally be broken. And she, Hazel Cooper, officially dead, unofficially the most wanted person in American intelligence, she would survive, would stay ahead of them, would live to see Spectre brought down, would watch from the shadows as the system that killed her father was finally held accountable. She powered off the phone again, started walking. The wilderness of Montana stretched out in every direction, perfect for disappearing, perfect for ghosts. Behind her, the cabin where Webb had made his last stand was probably burning now, evidence destroyed, questions buried. Another chapter in a story of official denials and convenient accidents. But this time it wouldn't work. This time the truth was already out there, flying across the internet at the speed of light, being downloaded, being saved, being spread too far and too wide to ever be contained again. Hazel walked until sunset, made camp in a small cave, built no fire, ate cold rations from her pack, sat in darkness and thought about everything she had lost, her career, her identity, her trust, her partner, everything except her purpose. Tomorrow she would keep moving, would make her way to a new safe location, would start building a new life with a new name, would become someone else while Hazel Cooper remained officially dead. But tonight she sat in the darkness and mourned. Mourned her father who had died for the truth, mourned Webb who had finally found the courage to act, mourned the version of herself who had believed in the agency, who had thought she was serving something greater than herself, who had been naive enough to trust that the system was worth protecting. That girl was dead. In her place was something harder, something that understood the world as it really was, not as the stories claimed it should be. A world where the good guys sometimes wore badges while doing terrible things, where patriotism could be a mask for corruption, where silence was safer than speaking and survival required choices that hollowed out your soul. She thought about the moral her father had tried to teach her, about choosing what was right over what was easy, about standing up even when everyone else sat down, about having the courage to act when action came with terrible cost. And she understood now, understood what he had known 20 years ago, that some fights you take not because you can win, but because refusing to fight means losing something more important than your life, your integrity, your soul. Your right to look yourself in the mirror and recognize who you're becoming. Her father had fought, had lost, had died. But he had died knowing he had done the right thing, had refused to be complicit, had chosen truth over comfort, over safety, over everything. And his daughter would do the same, would take the fight he started and carry it forward, would make sure his death meant something, would prove that silence wasn't the only option, that one person standing up could still matter, even if that person had to become a ghost to do it. Somewhere out there, Sarah Chen was probably scrambling, probably trying to contain the damage, probably planning her next move, trying to figure out how to eliminate Hazel once and for all, trying to protect Spectre, to preserve the system, to ensure the secret continued. But Chen had made a mistake, had assumed that making Hazel officially dead would make her easier to kill, had thought that isolation would make her vulnerable, had forgotten the most important lesson that any operator learns. The most dangerous person in the world isn't the one with the most resources, isn't the one with the most training, isn't even the one with the most to gain. It's the one with nothing left to lose, the one who has been pushed past fear, past self-preservation, past every instinct that tells you to run and hide and survive at any cost. Hazel Cooper had lost everything, her name, her career, her identity, her trust. She had been betrayed by her country, by her agency, by the people she thought she could count on. She had watched good people die for telling the truth, had seen corruption win again and again, had learned that the world was darker and crueler than she had ever imagined. But she was still alive, still breathing, still fighting. And that made her the most dangerous person Chen would ever face. Because Hazel had nothing left to protect except the truth, nothing left to preserve except her father's memory, nothing left to fear except dying without finishing what she had started. The cave was cold, dark, silent except for the wind outside and the beating of her own heart. Hazel closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to center herself, to find that place of calm she had learned to access during her training, that place where fear couldn't reach, where doubt couldn't poison, where she could be absolutely present, absolutely focused, absolutely committed to what came next. Tomorrow she would move, would continue running, would stay ahead of whoever Chen sent after her, would survive, would wait, would watch as the story she had released tore through Washington like wildfire, would see what happened when the truth finally came to light. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel it all. The grief, the rage, the exhaustion, the determination. Let it all wash through her without trying to control it or push it away. Let herself be human for just a little while before she had to become the weapon again. And in that darkness, in that silence, in that moment of absolute solitude, she made a promise to her father, to Webb, to Mitchell, to all the people who had been hurt by Spectre's corruption, to the passengers on Flight 847 who deserved a world where hijackings weren't orchestrated by their own government, to everyone who had ever trusted the system and been betrayed. She promised that she would not stop, would not quit, would not let them win. She would hunt Spectre until every person involved was exposed, until every secret was revealed, until the entire corrupt system was burned to the ground and built again with people who actually believed in the ideals they claimed to serve. It was an impossible promise, a suicidal promise, a promise that would probably get her killed. But it was the same promise her father had made, the same promise that had cost him his life. And she was her father's daughter, which meant she would keep that promise, no matter what it cost, no matter how long it took, no matter what she had to become to see it through. The wind howled outside the cave, cold, relentless, indifferent to human struggle. But Hazel Cooper sat in that darkness and felt something that she hadn't felt in days: peace, not happiness, not contentment, but the deep peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you're fighting for, from accepting the cost and choosing to pay it anyway, from understanding that sometimes the right path is the hardest path and walking it anyway. Dawn would come eventually, would bring new dangers, new challenges, new people trying to kill her, but she would be ready, would do what she had done on Flight 847, wait for the perfect moment, conserve her strength, choose her battles with precision, and when the moment came, when everything aligned, when the shot was there, she would take it without hesitation, without mercy, without regret, because that's what her father had taught her, not through words, but through the example of his life and his death. That sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself, doesn't make speeches, doesn't seek recognition or applause, it simply acts, simply does what needs to be done, simply stands for what is right even when the cost is everything. Hazel Cooper was many things now: a ghost, a fugitive, a daughter seeking justice, a soldier without a country, a warrior fighting a war most people didn't know existed, but above all, she was her father's daughter. And that meant she would see this through, would fight until the truth won or until she died trying. There was no third option, no compromise, no surrender. The story that had just been published would shake Washington to its foundations, would expose decades of corruption, would ruin careers and end legacies, would prove that the system people trusted was rotten at its core. But it was just the beginning, just the first shot in a war that would be fought in shadows, in back alleys, in quiet rooms where powerful people made decisions that affected millions. A war between those who wanted to preserve the corrupt status quo and those who demanded something better. And Hazel Cooper, small, exhausted, officially dead, she was going to win that war not because she was the strongest, not because she was the smartest, not because she had the most resources, but because she had something her enemies didn't. She had nothing left to lose, and she had learned the most important lesson of her life. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, the thing that changes everything, the thing that no amount of money or influence or firepower can stop, is absolutely nothing. Until it's time to do everything. What you just witnessed wasn't simply a tale of espionage and revenge. It was a reminder that true strength is measured not by how quickly you react, but by how wisely you wait. Hazel Cooper endured 93 minutes of degradation on that plane, endured 20 years of not knowing the truth about her father's death, endured betrayal by the people she trusted most, and through it all she waited, observed, calculated, chose her moments with precision that saved lives and exposed truth. The lesson here cuts deeper than tactics or training. We live in a world that rewards immediate reaction, that celebrates those who speak loudest and fastest, that confuses patience with weakness and silence with submission. But Hazel understood something most never learn, that the quiet ones, the ones who watch and wait and think before they act, they're often the ones who change everything, not through volume, not through violence, but through precision. Sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand recognition, doesn't seek applause or validation from those who lack the wisdom to see it. It simply acts. When the moment is right, when action will matter most, when silence transforms into the kind of motion that reshapes the world. And that's the truth that echoes long after the story ends.